Hello and good afternoon everybody, and welcome to the latest Urban Living webinar. Today we are going to be looking at the future of work, and we've got a fantastic panel to discuss the topic with, and we'll introduce you to them later. This webinar series is a precursor to a new event which we're launching in July this year in London called the Urban Living Festival. It's taking place at Tobacco Dock on July the 7th and the 8th. It's going to be one of the first large-scale hospitality and real estate events post-pandemic, and we're really looking forward to seeing loads of you there. More information about that is available in the chat. Now, today's session is going to last an hour. We're going to have a 45-minute panel discussion followed by 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please submit them using the chat or the Q&A function. And please keep yourself muted if you're not one of our panelists. Everyone who is registered for the session will receive a recording via email in the next couple of days. Now, this webinar series is sponsored by Res Harmonics, and we're just going to find out a bit more about them with a short video.
Res Harmonics is 100% dedicated to service departments and co-living, bringing together all the tools you need to drive performance and deliver a great guest experience. From channel management and direct bookings to finance, housekeeping, maintenance and customer journey automation, whether centrally or on the move, the platform consolidates all information into one system, saving you time, improving communication and maximising business performance.
Okay, so thanks to Res Harmonics. If you'd like to find out more about them, then you can see contact details for Steve Dow from Res in the chat. Now, I just wanted to show a few slides to give today's discussion a bit of context. These are all from some fairly recent articles that have been published in various publications. New research from IWG, which is a big workspace provider, says that more than 3 times the number of FTSE 250 companies are looking to use the hub and spoke model. Almost half are considering moving offices to areas where their workforce typically live. Only 13% expect that their workforce will return to a 5-day office week by the end of this year. And IWG is predicting that the future of work will revolve around a 15-minute commute. CIPD, the UK professional body for HR professionals, reports that more than 2/3 of employers say that the increase in home working has either boosted or has made no difference to productivity. And it's calling on the government to make the right to request flexible working a day one right for all employees. An academic paper published in the US hints that working from home is responsible for a 5% productivity boost in the post-pandemic economy. But working from home is not ideal for every scenario. A recent Deutsche Bank report says creative tasks without fixed outcomes usually require a great deal of intensive communication. And while existing teams may enhance their productivity remotely, newcomers will struggle to integrate and build up informal knowledge and establish informal networks. When it comes to commuting, Chris Jones, who is a transportation consultant, says not only is it an unknown factor as to how fast people will resume commuting, the question remains whether people will commute on a daily basis or rather adopt an ad hoc model where they only use public transport on certain days of the week or month. An unusually high number of people have left city centres in favour of suburban or rural living, further changing the way they would normally commute. And in terms of the office space market, in Q1 of this year in the US, investors closed on $10.5 billion worth of office acquisitions, which sounds a lot, but it's actually half of the figure the previous Q1. And the Corporation of London has published a 5-year action plan in which it states it wants to convert unused offices in the city into 1,500 new homes by 2030. Okay, so we're going to crack on. My name is George Sell. I'm Editor-in-Chief at International Hospitality Media. We are an online publisher of B2B sites for the hospitality sector, and we're also an event organizer. and we've got a fantastic panel of speakers with us today, and I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves briefly and tell us a bit about what they do. So we'll go from left to right on the slide. So Stephane, if you would like to go first, please. And I think you might be on mute, Stephane.
Yeah, that's the new life, the fabulous mute. Hello, everyone. Thank you to invite me. Sorry for my French accent. I'm Stephane Bensimon, WOJO CEO. Just a few words about WOJO. WOJO is a co-working company. We address three main issues. Office, co-working, and meeting rooms. We have more than 15 places in France and in Spain, and more than that, and that's the reason why I'm here with you, is we in our shareholder we have Accor Group, and we have a partnership with Accor to implement private offices and co-working space in hotels from the Accor Group, Ibis, Novotel, Mercure, Pullman, Sofitel. And that's represent for the flagship around 1 million square feet. And talking about the hotels, there is almost 1,500 hotels in Europe and more than 5,000 in the world. So you can imagine how we can implement the new way of working inside the hotel. And we start to put some companies in hotels for long stay for 1 year, 2 years, where they put their offices in the hotel. And what is the best? Having offices in a hotel when you have the services and all the amenities you can imagine in the office. So that's my life, and the new life will be very exciting with what will happen with the crisis.
Thank you, Stephane. Alex, over to you.
Hi, I'm Alex Brunner. I'm the CEO for Clockwise. I've spent most of my life in hotels and hospitality, and actually changed a year ago over into to Clockwise, who is a flexible office provider and co-working provider with currently 8 sites. We have more than doubled during the pandemic, during the lockdown, and we're going up to 15 in the UK now this year, and then going into Belgium in the autumn, once the lockdown finishes there. So yeah, Clockwise is really looks at it from a lifestyle and a design perspective, and with full flexibility, and really tries to adapt to our new way of working, whilst introducing a strong hospitality service aspect to the office world.
Thanks, Alex. Charlie, welcome to you.
Everyone, remember to unmute myself. I'm Charlie. I am co-founder and director of Cuckooz Nest, which is a flexible nursery and co-working space built to allow freelancing, self-employed women predominantly get back to work. I have 20 years actually experience in real estate, and 5 years offering space as a service, so working in the hospitality across service departments and co-working.
Thanks, Charlie. Neil.
Yeah, hi, thanks, George. Hello, everyone. My name is Neil Davies, and my practice, Neil Davies Architects, has been going nearly 9 years now. Our design base is in London. We've got projects worldwide. We do residential, service apartments, co-living, some hotels, paint your garden shed for the right price. But basically, yeah, we kind of do all those kind of sectors, cutting edge. We look to use latest technologies in all shapes and forms, without any compromise to our design output, our design product. And yeah, it's a pretty exciting time in this new world we find ourselves in. So yeah, that gives you a flavour of what we do.
Thanks, Neil. And last but not least, Lucy.
Hi there. I am the co-founder and COO of Kitt Offices. We find, design and manage flexible workspaces for businesses. businesses typically are between the size of about 20 people up to 150, 200 people, so probably slightly larger than the typical co-working company. And we do that by working with landlords at the moment all across London, hopefully beyond there in the not too distant future, to sort of repurpose their space as more flexible, more appealing office space for small companies.
Thanks, Lucy. You'll be able to see the LinkedIn details for all our panelists in the chat. So if you'd like to carry on the conversation with them after the session, then please do. So before we go on to the various topics we're going to discuss, I just wanted to get a kind of personal flavour for how everybody's own working life and patterns have been affected over the last year, and how much of that change each of the panelists expect to be permanent. Lucy, how about you? As a relatively new company, do you want to go first?
Yeah, it's an interesting one actually, because what's interesting for two ways. Firstly, we're obviously an office business, so the working from home element is challenging somewhat when we have clients occupying spaces. So we haven't been entirely remote. We have operations team and that kind of thing. I'm sure other people in the call have as well that have needed to be out and about. But I think what's interesting is my experience at Kitt, but also my previous company, which was a kind of tech company. Flexible working was always something that was offered. It just didn't really have the take up that I think it's now going to have post pandemic. So it wasn't everybody, everybody working remotely that didn't need to be on site was new, but I think it's in a way just pushed forward the trends that were already there and pushed people to take up what was already offered. And that has accelerated the trend that was already there, but by a really long way. So for us, my day-to-day didn't change that much, other than kind of the very first lockdown where everyone sort of went away to try and work out what the hell was happening to the world, and then come back out a couple of months later. And since then, it's been not a huge day-to-day transition, just because the nature of the work that we're doing. But it certainly has meant that certain teams within the business that don't need to be on site have taken up, obviously working remotely a lot more than they were doing before, which it will definitely not change.
Thanks, Lucy. And Stephane, at the other end of the scale, you're working for a division of a global business. How has the last year been for you in terms of where you work and how you work?
Well, as I told you before, the WOJO is a joint venture between Accor and Brig, construction company. On the hotel industry, I don't have to tell you how is challenged the last 12 months. The fact is, well, the company WOJO, the team are now installed in our own space, and what we discover with our own member, we have around 500 companies based in our WOJO site, and more than 100 now in the hotels. And what we understand from them is the impact of the technological aspect, like we have today with the Zoom, and we still work on that with much more investment in the technological aspect. And the other interesting learning is the way how the companies, the corporates, use this pandemic status to change their management, to change their vision of the CSR aspects, and specifically how they can use their offices, less offices, but much more better. And specifically with the commute aspect, we'll talk about that later on, I guess, to find a way to promote offices not far from the home of their colleagues. And that's the reason why the hotel industry has a strong role to play, because there is many hotels all over the world, more than co-working space today, but tomorrow they're going to integrate that. So sustainable growth, efficiency, and also cost reduction. That's another point we learn from the corporates we work with. the lease is the second fixed cost in the companies after the salaries. And they definitely need to make some cost reduction because of the crisis. And the way they will manage the offices, the way they will reduce their offices, it's a strong cost reduction, and it's a beautiful opportunity for them to addition CSR issue, cost reduction, and well-being of their employee. And it's the case also for my own employee.
Thanks, Stephane. Charlie, you're clearly back in the office, judging from your background there. Are things starting to get back to normal for you?
I am actually in a friend's workspace in London Fields near my home at the moment. But yes, I'm very fortunate because obviously we ran a workspace in a nursery which was open bar 2.5 months at the very beginning of the pandemic. Have felt like life has been pretty normal. My daughter's also been at school, so I have a routine, you know, and that's continued, which I feel very grateful for. I'm amazed at some of the statistics you have at the beginning of your slide about how people don't want to go back to work, because everything I see and hear is the opposite, you know. And it'd be good to get into that because, you know, I think after a year or more now, it really has taken its toll on mental health. And not everyone, you know, as you mentioned, has the same environment at home, be it Wi-Fi connectivity, space, and other issues which have popped up. So I'm excited to deep delve into this.
Okay. And Alex, you mentioned that you've been growing your team over the last year virtually. So can you tell us a bit about the challenges that posed?
Yeah, I think that was quite interesting. So we've gone from 12 employees when I started a year ago and 3 sites to now over 40 employees, nearly 50, 8 sites and 7 that are due to open in the next few months. So we've really built up an entire huge team, national team, in the middle of a pandemic over Zoom. So you're trying to integrate them into the team, build that sort of social connectivity with everyone without actually seeing them. Some of the people I've hired a year ago, just in the last 2-3 weeks, was the first time that I've seen them face to face. And I totally agree with what was said before, is this sort of pent up need for social interaction. From the last year, I can really see that people are coming to the office and they're just thinking, there are 20,000 things I want to discuss and I want to say, and I want to have all these chats because I didn't have them for the last year. And I want to get that out. So we see a lot of that. We've tried to focus on that side and then also focus on the wellness side. So we've done a lot around the wellness for our members in the workspaces in the offices, as well as our employees. So anything we do for our employees, we also offer out to our members, to really keep that as a clear value of the business. And that has helped, that built resilience within the team. And I think that'll stand some businesses in really good stead now for the next year, because I think our batteries are quite depleted.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Neil, designing buildings is a collaborative process, and we saw on one of the slides earlier that while working from home might be great for some tasks and some roles, extended processes which involve a lot of collaboration are difficult to do online. So how has the last year been for you and your colleagues?
That's a complex question, but I'll have a go. It's been intense, I'm not going to lie. We delivered three kind of quite high-end residential projects last year, and although yes, the creation and the kind of design of things does revolve around some very kind of close team working. So that inevitably the interaction that you have to have on Teams, or whether it's Zoom or any of those other kind of platforms, goes up exponentially in terms of trying to kind of coordinate everything and get people thinking along the same lines. But essentially the challenge is that you're trying to you're trying to create something in 3D with something that is essentially 2D in terms of your computer screen. So there are tools available to you, and you can 3D model it, and you can talk about different things. But there were some successes in terms of how we were delivering things, but there were also a couple of things that we would have done differently, and we now do differently. So we've had to kind of change our working processes if this is going to become more permanent. Coming out of the back of that, we now essentially blend some home working with sort of physical interaction and physical meetings, because you can't just do it all in a virtual space or kind of at a distance. So it was kind of an interesting journey, but we were kind of already on that journey in terms of restructuring the business to deliver projects worldwide over the last 3 years, really having to kind of restructure following the referendum. So we were kind of on the way. I think it's to Charlie's point, whether it's Charlie or Lucy's point, is essentially all of these tools were already available to all of us, but this pandemic has supercharged all of this in terms of forced us down this route and made us have to use it, and made us kind of sort of make it work. I wouldn't say we're there yet in terms of getting the right blend. It certainly involves a lot more, just a lot more talking about everything. And I now go back to actually making physical maquettes in my home office when I'm not in the office. Almost like I was at college again, just to look at something, because there is something about when you look at something physically in a model form. If it's wrong, your eye tells you it's wrong. You don't know why, but you get to that in time. So I don't think I'm alone in the design and the manufacturing businesses to say that we've probably still got a way to go, and how that kind of morphs into something else, and there'll be other tools that will come out of this. There'll be other softwares and everything that come out of this that will actually make probably our lives easier. But I would say at the moment we're probably only halfway along the journey in terms of cracking this, and it's been, like I say, it's been a very, very steep learning curve for everyone, like not just us as architects, but in the whole of the construction industry, of how we design and procure buildings in 2021 and beyond.
Yeah. So let's talk about a bit about how we think the average working week is going to look next year. So if just sticking with you for a moment, Neil, there's a lot of stats out there that say the most likely outcome is that people will be averaging 3 days a week in the office and 2 days either from home or out in the field or whatever. Does that tally with how you see things going for your business?
Well, let me put it this way. You remember those kind of adverts in the was it kind of the 50s or the 60s, and there were all this kind of tech that would be in kitchens, and this was aimed at it. It was aimed at a kind of a housewife. It's now completely outdated, but the idea was that it would suddenly free up a load of time for everyone, and wouldn't we have a load of time for leisure? And hey presto, it would be a kind of eureka moment, bang, we wouldn't have to do anything anymore in the household. In the same way that everyone thinks, great, we're going to go to shorter weeks, unfortunately, the hard reality is that we are going to be working harder. We already are. I look at the numbers. I look at the timesheets, the hours that the guys post. We're working kind of 20%, 25% more than we did pre-COVID, and that is unfortunately going to stay. You cannot have the efficiencies that you have in just a pure work environment from a day to day, even though you're cutting down on the journeys into work and all the rest of it. You cannot have the same output working remotely. Unfortunately, I would love to say that hand on heart to say, great, we could deliver the same product, the same service for 3 or 4 days a week, but it just is not going to happen.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Lucy, what is your client base telling you about how they are likely to restructure the working week of their staff? What changes are you seeing?
It's so interesting, because I think everyone has spent the last year doing a bunch of surveys and reading a bunch of opinion pieces that essentially completely contradict each other. The tone has changed massively in the last year, from working from home's amazing to actually it's not that great, actually everyone's suffering from mental health, and actually we really want to get back to the office, but we still want to work from home. And honestly, I don't think anyone knows what they're going to do. It is the truth. And I think we're going to go through a period of probably, 3-4 years of test and learn, test and learn, test and learn. Because the reality is people want to go back to the office because they want to collaborate, they want to innovate, and they want having mixed meetings where you have half people in person, half people on Zoom is incredibly difficult to make work for obvious reasons. And if with all of those dynamics, plus your staff being totally mixed in what they think, but most people saying 2 to 3 days either way, it's really, really difficult to be efficient with a strategy around real estate, because you're saying, okay, well, do we bring everybody back for 3 days and then nobody back for 2 days? So we maximize collaboration and kind of those water cooler conversations that are where the magic happens, kind of thing. But then you've got really inefficient real estate because you've got 2 days a week with nobody coming in. The other way of doing it is you have certain teams come in certain days and you slightly reduce the amount of space you need for that reason, which I think will be something that lots of companies do adopt, particularly of the kind of size that we deal with, so there's the SMEs. But again, you're then missing that magic, that cross-team discussion, that cross-team collaboration, that efficiency that comes from, oh, what are you doing? Someone who you never really interact with day to day, finding out what they're doing and coming up with an idea together. So unfortunately, there's no right or wrong answer. And I don't think we will know the right or wrong answer. There will never be a right or wrong answer. I think it will be different for different types of businesses. The more technical and the later stage of the business, the more likely a remote model will work, in my opinion, because you've got, if you've got a team of engineers, let's say Microsoft or whatever, big tech company with a product that's very formed, the ability to very accurately define work and ship it out to somebody anywhere in the world is quite straightforward. But as soon as you are earlier stage or smaller, or maybe your product's more physical, that the challenge is much, much bigger to get that right, particularly when, like me and by the sounds of it, many people on this call, you're an earlier stage business, your product is still moving around a bit, your processes aren't quite where they need to be. It's so difficult to efficiently work remotely all the time in that dynamic. So I think we're going to have to guide our clients through it, is the answer. But I think we're going to start with a bunch of hypotheses that people can adopt, and then they'll have to tell us whether they work or not.
Thanks, Lucy. Charlie, your client base, you said, is predominantly freelancers. But how do you think families in general have been affected by the last year? And do you think your product will have more demand from SMEs and large companies who want to take advantage of your offer?
So I have a lot to say on this matter. So I think that the kind of pros that have come out of COVID are really that in kind of employee presenteeism has kind of gone away, which is great. And I think the ideal is kind of work flexibly where and when you want. And as you mentioned, that's kind of started to become ingrained in kind of corporate culture. But unfortunately for my customer, which is the kind of parent workforce, which, makes up a big percentage of employees, as any parent will know, there's no such thing as flexibility, free time, or anything else, right? You are dictated by your child's routine, school drop-off, nursery drop-off, nap times, meal times, play dates, whatever it may be. So I struggle to see how a flexible work week, kind of 3 days plus 2, or mix and match will really work. And what I'm also seeing, in answer to your question about kind of my business model, is, and I think one of the questions you've got for later on is about grey space, kind of dead office space. I am seeing a lot more inquiries and conversations happening with big companies about on-site nurseries. Sadly, there have been a massive loss of businesses throughout COVID, but nurseries being no exception. There was already a shortage of space. There is going to be an even tighter supply issue. So fingers crossed that that's a kind of a movement that picks up momentum again, because I think it was very much on the agenda with the gender pay gap and everything else, but obviously COVID has put lots of things adrift. And I think, to Neil's point as well, I think this is, you know, we all think we're at the end and everything, the pubs are open, but I do think this is going to continue to evolve over the next 2 to 5 years before, you know, we can really call it the new normal.
Yeah, the pubs aren't open until you can sit at the bar, really, are they? Alex, how will companies balance the need for their own office premises and combining that with a flexible offer? Do you see business coming your way from companies reducing their own leased office space and combining that with the kind of thing you offer? Or do most of your clients only use your offices?
No, listen, even during the pandemic, we had a lot of people that work for big FTSE 20, FTSE 50 companies that had closed the offices for usual reasons. Big tower, 2 lifts, nobody can get up to the 20th floor without waiting 45 minutes, even in total lockdown. So they were looking for an office or space to work from because they just weren't in an environment where they could work from home. And as well as everyone keeps on talking about, working from home is a great thing. It's a great thing if you can and afford a dedicated office space within your home. If you are sharing, flat sharing, if you have the kids there, if your partner is on calls as well and has as a projecting voice as myself or my partner do, you'll drive each other crazy within 2 days. So you're then looking for other options. So we have a lot of clients that are now saying, right, we're gonna have a core base where everyone can get together, but then we have sort of smaller office spaces where our employees can choose where they want to work from, but where they have a proper setup and where they have a guaranteed Wi-Fi provision, where they have the right daylight, where they have a proper desk and a proper chair. I mean, the first thing that was sold out wasn't actually toilet paper, it was ergonomic chairs. They were on a backlog waiting list for over 4 months at that point, because everyone wanted that chair at home. They couldn't sit on their kitchen stool anymore. So we get more and more of that, but there's no commitment for like 3 or 5 year leases as there was before. There's more need for flexibility because nobody wants to predict now what their employees are wanting to do and what's the best way of working come Q4 this year or early next year, never mind 2023 or 2024. So a flexible offering of the space as well as a flexible modular design becomes really key when it comes to our workspaces. Thanks,
Alex. And Lucy, I think most of your clients, you said, are startups or SMEs. So what are the key benefits of a flexible office space to them, and do they combine that with their own premises, or do they broadly just come to you?
Yeah, so they are startups. They're kind of more scale-ups, I'd say. So they're coming out of their they're still in hyper growth, but they're coming out of their extreme uncertain phase to slightly more certain, but still not very certain phase. And what I mean by that is they've secured a bit of funding, and inherently, if you've secured funding, you need to be able to plan more than a few months ahead. So they probably have a 2 to 3 year plan that they have funding for. And so what that generally means is they want to move into a space that helps them build their team and their culture. Whereas in shared workspace, it's a bit more of a shared culture dynamic. You're sharing with other people. There's a community around the space that in some instances might detract from your own culture building. That's not to say that all spaces do that at all. It's just sometimes the perception of co-working with the shared areas has that effect. So we work with companies to create space around their needs. The bespoke design element is quite a big part of our sell, and really build it around their brand and culture. In terms of what they're looking for, it's funny because the term flexibility in the traditional real estate world actually means a 2 or 3 year commitment, which just shows how like vastly different the worlds are. And that's still true. That's still what is assumed as flexible. Before the pandemic, flexibility was a 5 year lease with a 3 year break. So it shows it's worlds apart, really. But what's interesting about our clients is flexibility. It's like a must-have. It's not even a question. It's not even something they think about. Signing anything longer than a two-year commitment is just not something that they would even entertain, because they don't plan the rest of their business more than 2 years ahead. So why would they plan their real estate that far ahead? Obviously, the pandemic has opened up, certainly in the short term, the need for even more flexibility than that. So and they're seeing that in the traditional world as well, that the lease lengths in the traditional world are down to about 2.5 years versus 6 or 7 years only a couple of years ago. So it's had a massive impact already, and that's not including all of the flexible workspaces and the co-working spaces as well. The data doesn't incorporate that. So I think in the very short term, that will come down to maybe a year, maybe less for smaller businesses. I think it will go back up to maybe 2-3 years, but I don't think people are going to ever be needing to plan that far ahead. At least certainly I'm hoping for my business. I think the traditional real estate world is going to have to reshape around flexibility. And we're starting to see that already, which is fantastic for everyone on this call, I think. And what that will mean, hopefully, is that there is a new normal in that sense, and flexible real estate strategies and flexible real estate commitments are just the normal for all companies of under a certain size. And even the bigger companies, as you touched upon, you might still have your slightly longer term HQ building, but it's certainly that model is massively in question. And this hub and spokes approach, and the different some bigger companies are talking about hubs, a West London hub, an East London hub, and then maybe some more suburban hubs, that kind of thing. But everything's on the table, I think. But I don't think we're going to really understand how the big enterprise company is going to behave for a good few years yet.
These ever decreasing length of leases must put a lot of pressure on companies like yours. I guess it makes you up your game. You're going to have to deliver a fantastic service, or in order to retain your clients.
I mean, it's actually really beneficial for us, and I think again probably everyone on this call. It's our product is built around flexibility. We're working with landlords to sort of translate their product into something more flexible and more appealing, but typically our customer is looking for a 2-year commitment on the whole, which is kind of flexible enough to convince landlords to move. So it's actually been really positive for us, because we're able to access more real estate on the landlord side than we were before. Landlords are much more open to trying new things, because they've reached a point of, I mean, they were under pressure anyway from flexible workspaces and co-working spaces. This is, I shouldn't say the nail in the coffin, but it's certainly another thing that's on piled more pressure on an increasingly pressurized situation. So we're seeing a lot more traction on the landlord traditional real estate side than we were before, which is good for us.
Yeah. Stephane, let's talk a bit about the role of hospitality companies in providing workspace. I mean, we've all seen the traditional hotel business centre, although I don't think I've ever seen one being used. They were often like ghost ships. WOJO, I think, has got several tiers, so the offer varies according to the hotel, the individual hotel. So what do you provide, and how do you go about deciding what level of service is appropriate for each particular hotel?
Yeah, well, again, and as usual, the location is the key issue in this matter. We talk about the perfect week of working. We know that it could be 2 days at work and maybe 3 days at home. But in fact, what we observe also is the fact that many people, and specifically the millennials, wants to live outside of the big city, and maybe the 3 days outside of the big city, or 2 days in the countryside or in the seaside. They need to find a space to work, not just only at home. And we observe in the hotels where we put our offices, it's a real success outside of big cities. In fact, the companies wants to find this space outside of the big cities. And talking about the hotels, part of the location, the services, and the space available. Specifically today, with the pandemic increases in the hotel industry, you can imagine that there is some space available. And tomorrow we can imagine that the business travel will come down for 10 or 15% because of the MICE aspect will decrease. And all the hoteliers understood that there is a way to find a new businesses, and the work issue is maybe one of the answer, not the only answer, but one of the answer to use the space available. And it's not a big deal in terms of investment. Looking to Neil, in terms of transforming a room or a meeting room in offices is not a big deal. There is a work to do, that's for sure, but it's not a big deal to get out the bed for sure, and to arrange the room as an office or a meeting room as an open space. And you can benefit from all the services inside the hotel, and also the network. It's a real lever, the network, because as soon as you are member of a network like WOJO, for example, you can use all the addresses. And we know that because we are more and more nomads, the people want to maybe work for one day after a meeting or after an appointment and stay for half a day in a space, a private space, because we want to speak with Zoom, so I cannot be in a working sharing space. We all know that. So there is box inside the hotel more and more. So services, location, network, that's the big lever for the hotel industry to address these new businesses. And last but not least, those people coming in the hotels are the people living around the hotels. And it's one of the big, let's say, challenge from the hotel to, for once, let enter the people living around the hotel, because since the beginning of the hotel industry is the foreigners coming, not the neighbor, and that's a big opportunity to for the first time to let enter the neighbor inside the hotel and make the hotel a real life style or life space in the quarter, in the city. So maybe the hotel will become a real new spot to make business, not just only to sleep or to eat.
Yeah, thanks, Stephane. It's interesting, this idea that people don't want to be in cities so much, and the IWG stuff earlier about the future of work revolving around a 15-minute commute. Alex, you've got locations around England, but they're all in sort of fairly major cities. But do you think this 15-minute commute idea is realistic, and do you think there's potential for flexible workspace in towns the length and breadth of the country?
Yeah, look, most of our locations are in the regional cities across the country. We have one location in London, in Wood Green, which is also more sort of outskirts, zone 3 and 4 in North London. Everything else is in big cities like Glasgow and Edinburgh, Bristol, Exeter, Manchester, Liverpool. And for most of them, commute is probably more around the half an hour mark. I think what we can't forget is when we're going back to the office, and one of the things where people want to go back to the office is not only the social interaction, but it is grabbing that coffee beforehand, doing that lunch together, going for a drink or meal afterwards. There's a social aspect that happens before and after, or in between, outside of the office space, and the hospitality provisions around that. And I think one of the reasons why London has been so slow to come back is that everyone is waiting for these hospitality spaces to reopen, to be able to go back inside. And I think we're gonna see a huge shift of people getting back into the office, because I think everyone is very tired of their own cooking. And whatever, in our urban environment we have around us is way more limited than in our big city center locations. And that's going to be, again, the magnet for people to come back in. And especially, you know, they are sort of more younger, single demographics that are really going to be driven back into those locations when theaters are reopening, gigs are reopening, and so on. To that enrichment from a cultural point of view that happens after work and is associated with those locations is as important, and your location of your office is as important there than anything else.
Yeah.
Well, if I may, the main challenge today for the human resources guy is how to let the people coming back to work, and you need to find a way and to give something new, and services, short commutes, collectivity, and community is certainly one of the levers that could help companies to make the people coming back at work. And that's the reason why a place like ours could be an answer. And we have a lot of things to do, again, because it's just the beginning, in fact.
Thank you. Lucy and Charlie, you're both exclusively in London at the moment. And do you have secondary and tertiary locations on your hit list in the future, or is yours very much an urban model? Charlie, do you want to go first?
I was going to say, let Lucy take it. Yes, have done and continue to have discussions about kind of home counties, so Oxfordshire, Hertfordshire, Bristol. I think for me, the real challenge with the business, which I think I'm sure everyone can sympathise with, is and as Lucy said, we really, don't know where the dust will settle in all of this. And I think anyone growing a real estate business, planning a 1 to 3 year strategy is very difficult. The market's still moving, investor and landlord sentiment still moving. The idea of this hub and spoke, or will we take buses and trains ever again? What will the commute look like? So we kind of took the decision to put secondary locations on hold and kind of continue the conversations with the corporates. But again, they're slow moving discussions too. So actually, again, like other businesses are pivoting to a digital business as well, which I won't bore you with because it's not real estate focused.
Lucy, does that tally with what's happening with your business?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think what we concluded on it was that if anyone does it, it will be the corporates, because what their hub and spoke model relies on is there being enough of a densely populated area where all your workers live that you can build a local office. What startups don't have is that, and any businesses that are under 500 people even, you don't have to be small for all of your workers not to live in a certain area. And the other challenge with it is the type of businesses we work with are often in a bit of a talent war. And if you're in a talent war and you're trying to compete for talent, obviously the remote, having a flexible working policy is a benefit that people expect now. But aside from that, you kind of need to locate yourself really centrally to give yourself the widest pool of talent. So we kind of took a look at our product, took a look at who our product is resonating with, and kind of said, actually, us going out into the suburbs isn't really the right product for that customer. So let's try and stay focused on what we think the best product for them is. So we're kind of, for that reason, staying pretty focused in the central areas. But as their real estate strategies change, we might change. I can't see it working for the small growing business that's trying to attract talent. I think the only other thing I'd say on it around cities generally is I think lots of people who are involved in this conversation are perhaps at a slightly different life stage to the younger generation who are entering the workforce now, or are maybe in their mid-20s. And as I think Alex touched upon, working from home doesn't work that well when you're in a small flat in London, and you're in London because you want to build your network, you want to meet your partner, you want to make friends, you want to be part of a buzzy city. And I think there is a bit of danger in being a little bit closed off to that point of view when you're talking to only the people who are a little bit more advanced in their career, a little bit more advanced personally with their setup, because you can kind of see why it works pretty well for some people who maybe have moved out to the suburbs, have got a family and like having that extra couple of hours a day with their family. But you look at the worker who has flatmates and really came to London to make friends and build their professional standing and learn from others. It just doesn't work that well for that demographic, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the hospitality industry has got a huge role to play in this, though, and sort of further to Stephane's point, is the way I see it is that there's the real estate world and then there's the hospitality world, and never the two shall meet, or very rarely do they meet, in terms of, it depends whether something's a propco or not co. But the one thing that hospitality is really, really good at is, amongst other things, is really kind of almost like a curated approach in terms of making something successful, in terms of, really sort of driving the kind of the uses and blending things in, and actually making kind of little mini communities within, different hotel or, different setups of their offerings. And, what that can do in a real estate market is that you could effectively, with the right curatorship, create these kind of mixed use communities in, or sort of microcosm use communities, rather than a much kind of sort of static thing of go like, well, how much, how long do you want your lease for? Oh, a year. Okay, well, that's fine. What, with the 6-month break? Yeah, okay, fine. Okay, and then we'll go on to something else. It's more, I think it's much more fundamental than just a kind of a lease term. It's more like, okay, well, what are the agents that we need to actually build a successful hub that people can go back to effectively, for the millennials, for the kind of the younger generations, to kind of create their networks, to work there, to live there, to play there, to do all of these things that, that the hospitality industry does with incredible dexterity, and, is really, really good at it. And I think if we can get that symbiosis between those kind of ideas that are going into real estate, I think that's going to become a huge part of attracting talent back into the urban realm and completely reinvigorating city centres. I kind of probably sounding like a crack record in the things that I've been putting out there in the last sort of couple of years, but yeah, we've got an incredible opportunity now in the city centres, in the hollowing out of a lot of the retail, to completely rethink some of these buildings. But I think the skill set that the hospitality industry has, even though it's struggling in certain sense, can actually completely supercharge the real estate world if the real estate world lets it. And that is a fundamental question of a lot of the big estates. I'm not just talking about London, a lot of kind of big property owners, landowners, do they want this to happen? How it obviously relates to how they're funded and things like that. But are they open to those kind of ideas, and a completely change in mindset in terms of how do you build a successful community for essentially the generations that are the future, like your millennials and your generation Zs and beyond, because ignore those generations and let them wither on the vine at your peril. They are our future, and essentially a design is part of it, but it's all about the curatorship and really being open to that kind of symbiosis of different things that are in the mix that can be amazing, could be absolutely incredible.
Thanks, Neil. From a big concept, I just want to move on to the particulars of office design and how that is changing to accommodate new ways of working, new concerns over wellness and health and so on. Do you want to kick off with that, Neil, from an architect's point of view, and then we'll go over to one of the operators?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of sort of taken a step back in terms of, okay, how does this office space, or how do these office spaces kind of slightly repurpose themselves? And it's all about, it's actually sort of tapping back to the elemental sense. I mean, aside from kind of building in a little bit of flexibility, and people are a bit more spread out, and they're, you know, whether there's certain screens or you get tech that purifies the air and things like that. But, you know, is there enough light? What about the air? Is it fresh? You know, nature, biophilic design, the influence of plants, and you know, and a healthy environment. And it's just, it's really kind of tapping into, you know, those almost like kind of 4 elemental pieces in office design that I think are really the ways to attract people back into the modern office. It's no longer, is it purely Cat A, Cat B, you know, all of these bits and pieces. It's more like, it feels a little bit like the extension of your living space, but it isn't, because you're not just working off a kitchen table and there's kids screaming at you and you can't really think straight, and you, even with your noise cancelling's on or whatever. It's more than that. It's essentially a kind of step forward that the modern workplace will be just subtly different, in terms of just being a little bit less itchy carpet, whitewashed walls. It's something, I can't really define it. Sorry, George, I'm not really answering your question directly, but it's something more than that. And actually, most people going back into office will now expect that.
Yeah. Well, let's ask Alex, how will your future properties in your pipeline that are open, how will they differ design-wise from something, say, that you would have opened a year or two years ago?
Well, I think one of the key things which we need to recognize is the world went absolutely quiet for 12 months. And we got used to that low level of white noise and that being able to focus. And now you're going back into an office, even just with 3 or 4 people, where you used to be 4 in an office of 15, and somebody's on the phone and you just can't concentrate anymore on the work you're doing. So creating different zones that are focused around private, quiet work, areas where you can take calls. We used to do everything by calls. We now do quite a huge percentage still of our work, and we'll continue to do so via Zoom or Teams or other medias, via video. So we'll need to facilitate that. And then we have worked at home, where most people do not have white or magnolia walls, and they do not want to go back into a room that has just really bad acoustics, stark white walls, and bad lighting. So bringing the sort of domestic, but also the hospitality design into these spaces and lift it up from that perspective is key. You don't want the white box with a white table, grey chair, and weird carpet tiles. You don't feel comfortable there anymore.
You certainly don't get that at WOJO, judging by Stephane's background. We've got a couple of questions come in here. Stephane, I'm going to ask you the first one from Tia Ross, who asks, as a result of what's happened in the last year or so, will there be changes to the design of co-working spaces, and is there now a need for more private rooms, private space?
Yeah, well, as you can see behind me, the design, what we decided in the WOJO positioning is to each WOJO has its own designer, its own story, because we play on the network and you can change and you can use the different WOJO. And talking about the design and the space, like Alex said before, we push a lot the fact that a day work is based on 2 hours. You have to work very in a quiet space, and 2 hours you need to take a coffee with a colleague and work on a briefing or whatever, and 2 more hours you need to work with a team, and finally you may need to make a quick 10-minute sleep for a nap. And so we create this different space inside our building, and it's already in place in the hotel industry, as you can imagine. And the fact that we push a lot these different space. Let's open the fact that you may have a small offices with your colleague, and then you can get out to work in different space with many beautiful design aspect, because we invest a lot in the design, in the sports room, in the meeting rooms. Meeting rooms are a key issue for tomorrow, because we need definitely to get space where you can innovate and brainstorm, and meeting rooms are done for that. So we spend a lot of resources to create this kind of space. And coming back to what could happen tomorrow in the home changes, an idea that we are trying to work on is the fact that, you know, the famous foot of the building, of the lodging building, tomorrow could be a co-working space, because we're going to have, it's too expensive to have a room in each house or in each small apartment, specifically in Paris or in London, to work in. But we can use the famous foot of the building to create co-working space. You know, like the washing machine in New York on the when everybody is working, and it's a real community of the washing machine. That there, the co-working space could be an answer. And finally, to answer Neil's suggestion, talking about hospitality, just to your information, we are working now with Accor Hotel for sure to create combination of co-working building and hotel building in the same building. We create that with some designer, and it's an opportunity for the companies to have a real answer, a mixed use answer. As I said before, let's the neighborhood coming in, and to have a perfect combination between the hotel and the hospitality world and the working world. And it's not at the same time, in fact, in the day long. Working during the day, hotel is more in the night. So it's a perfect combination. And in terms of economy, of ROI, it's good for the landlords. The big challenge is to let the landlord world understand these big changes, because they're still a little bit fixed on the heavy lease, fixed lease for 10 years, and it's not anymore the new world. Now we are talking about management contract or variable lease or whatever. I guess Charlie, Alex, and Lucy knows that by heart. It's a real challenge for us to let them know that they have to change a little bit their mind.
I think that's a topic for another webinar, sadly, because we've run out of time. I'm just going to show a few slides before we wrap up, but thank you all for your contributions. It's been really interesting. Next week, we're starting a special one-off series looking at corporate travel in the APAC region. So there's 4 webinars over 4 days. And if you would like to sign up for those, the link is in the chat. The next 2 urban living webinars are up on your screen there. And again, the links will be coming up. The next one is about ESG, money versus meaning, followed by senior living on June the 2nd. As I said, this series is a precursor to the Urban Living Festival, which is taking place in person in London in July. These are all our fantastic sponsors and partners. And if you'd like more information on that, then please do get in touch with my colleague, Katie. Finally, we are across all these social media channels, so give us a follow and join the conversation. And all it remains is for me to say thank you to Res Harmonics for sponsoring. Thanks ever so much to Charlie, to Neil, to Lucy, to Alex, and to Stephane for joining us today on what was a really good session, I think. So good we've overrun by a few minutes, so sorry about that. But thanks everybody, and I'll see you all on another webinar soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.